Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our live webinar looking at customer experience. I'm just going to start the session by doing a very quick sound check. I want to make sure that we're live and you can hear us. Please react. You've got icons where you can do thumbs up or you can pop yes in the question box, just so that I know that we're all live and you can hear us. Fantastic, flooding in. Brilliant. Thank you, everybody, for doing that. Well, welcome. Thank you for joining us today for this live session. My name is Chantal Newton and I'm the Marketing Director at the UK Contact Centre Forum. I've just got some housekeeping points to do before we begin. We do have live captions available for this session. There's a box at the bottom of your screen. It should be a little icon with a square and two C's, and you can go in and customize those settings for yourself to be as suitable as you need them. This session is expected to last around an hour, so we've got about 45 minutes with our panel, and then we have a 15-minute Q&A at the end. If you do have any questions throughout this session, please pop them in your questions box, and I will make sure that that gets put to our panel towards the end of the session. We are recording today, so the live session will be recorded and fully sent to you within about 3 hours of the session ending. Please feel free to share this with anybody that you also feel would enjoy the content. So that gets the boring stuff out of the way. Let me introduce you to today's chair. We've got Chris D'Souza, and Chris is a director at CGI for Contact Centre and Customer Experience Advisory. Chris, it's over to you to start.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's fabulous to be here. I'm really looking forward to our discussion on customer experience. I think the first thing we shall do is introduce the panel. So if I just go around on my screen, so that's with Trevor Gowty. Great to have you here.
Thank you very much, Chris. So brief introduction for myself. Irish, living in Scotland. Loch swimming is my sanity, so that's what keeps me going 365 days of the year. I love people, and I genuinely believe that AI can help us be much more human in the contact center. So my background from a contact center perspective, I've been in every role from being on the phones, making and taking calls, right through to defining and deciding on the technology that's deployed. I currently have the joy of being a contact center specialist at Cisco. So I've got 85,000 smart colleagues that I can reach out to and ask for guidance and advice on. And I'm delighted to be here. Thank you very much, Chris.
Welcome, Trevor. Next on the list, we've got Katie Stabler.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm Katie. I have a customer experience consultancy called Cultivate. I support all manner of industries, including contact centres, with their customer experience. And I think, like a lot of us, I started in a contact centre throughout university as a customer service agent for numerous different finance and telecoms companies. But now, you can find me practicing customer experience in all genres. Recent author of CXism. If you haven't got my book, go ahead and get it. And a lot of you might recognize me as the daytime host at Awards International Customer Experience Awards.
Fantastic. Great to have you here, Katie. And finally, but by no means least, Derek Lewis.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Hello, everyone. My name's Derek Lewis, and 18 months ago, I started Lewis CX Consulting. But for more than 25 years, I've been driving CX and digital transformation, exploiting contact centers, CRM, e-commerce solutions. I actually began my consulting career in IBM Global Services, and I've either worked for or partnered with many of today's leading contact center and CCaaS solution providers. So I'm now operating as an independent consultant, providing CX thought leadership, combined with business-driven consulting, and I also provide best practice advisory services, trying to help companies unlock and deliver value through contact center business transformation. So that's me in a nutshell. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Welcome, Derek. So we've got a bunch of consultants all going to gang up on you, Trevor. Is that the format for today? Right, so we're going to talk about customer experience. That's the topic for our series of webinars. So I'm going to kick that straight off with a question about technology. And I'm sure we will follow along the lines to Trevor that you mentioned AI. I think within the first 10 seconds of your intro. So that's probably going to feature a fair amount in our discussion today. But let's have a little think about the fact that there is more technology in our customer service and contact center space than we've ever seen before. I started about 30 years ago in contact centers. We had a phone on a desk and a pad which we would write things down on. However, when you ask or you talk to most consumers, what you find is they will tell you that the overall experience that they're getting is extremely poor. So the question for the panel to kick us off is, why do you think that is? All the toys and gadgets and technology that we've got available to us, yet we're not delivering, or the industry is not delivering customer experience as it should. Who wants to
I
jump
could
in?
jump in there if that's okay. I think we're Chris, you're absolutely right. We're not short of technology. There's a solution for each individual challenge in there, not always necessarily focused from a customer perspective. And I think the reason I referenced AI and that the fact that it can allow organizations to become much more human is I genuinely believe it. It'll be able to take some of the mundane activities out of the actual act of service delivery. So I think that's particularly important. I think in my experience, and I spend pretty much every day in front of contact center decision makers and brands trying to sort of crack this nut of how they get to deliver better service, is organizations very often have broken journeys, and many organizations don't go through that whole journey as a customer themselves often enough. And I think you've got to keep being fresh and new and going through those journeys to understand where those breakpoints actually are and the impact that it has. And, you know, is it Maya Angelou, that famous phrase, which she sort of said, which is, people will often forget what you said and what you did even, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And all of us as customers have always been in that position where an organization that we've maybe trusted has made us feel unloved. And I think that's particularly important when it comes to that feeling about whether being well served.
What do you
I
think,
totally
Katie?
Yeah, I totally agree with Trevor. I couldn't echo those sentiments more strongly, and I love the Maya Angelou quote there. I think it's synonymous with CX, isn't it? But I think you're right. I think, ultimately people are implementing tools for the business and not for the customer. It doesn't matter if we say that it is for the customer to improve the customer experience. I think companies need to be honest with themselves, and actually it's for the business. And look, that's fine, right? We're businesses. We have to operate in a certain way. But I think it's about recognizing that true strategic reason that you are implementing the tools that you are, and then just building around that. So it might not be for the customer initially, but how can it be made to improve the customer experience? And exactly like Trevor said, it can't be fragmented. It can't be looked at in isolation from other areas of the business or the journey.
Do you think that
Yeah,
they're putting they put the tools in front of the they've got the tool and let's look at what we can do with it, for example? Sorry, Derek.
Yeah, it's that look. It's that I really like that saying of, technology is the answer, but what's the question again? I think that happens all the time. We get excited by some piece of technology, fine, but is it really solving a problem that we have? Is it really answering a question that we have? Is it the right thing to do at this moment in time? There just isn't always, not always, enough of a strategic approach to implementation.
I completely agree. And I think in the last couple of years, I've tried to start conversations, especially with new organizations, to say, can you just wipe your minds clean and just assume that there's a piece of technology that can fix any problem you can possibly imagine? Can we now start talking about your business and the opportunities and challenges? And when we get to the end of it, we'll work out how to fix it. I think I agree with you, Katie. I think a lot of the technology that's been deployed in recent years has been focused on fixing known and obvious internal financial operational challenges, trying to reduce backlogs, get rid of bottlenecks, ease service platform issues, because they were the pains of the day. But I have seen recently that I'm seeing a lot more subsequent phases of those technology deployments now putting more focus on opportunities for service improvement and actually delivering things that would be of obvious value to the customers. But I think they almost had to take the weight off the pressure cooker first to make the time and resources available to start doing the cleverer stuff. And your point about integration as well is very good. Some great use cases and test cases were done in early days in isolation, but I think everyone's realizing now, if you can't link the data and the systems and the processes, you're going to struggle to actually deliver decent customer service end to end.
Mm-hmm.
One final point, I think I've just seen the UKCCF report that came out last month, and they're showing that there's a lot of fluctuation still, as always, in people's perception because of economic factors and the ever-changing customer expectations. So it's not just the technology, of course, it's how people feel and think about it and what else is going on in their lives as to whether you get a good score or not when they ask you, are we doing, are we using our technology and delivering better value?
Well, that's, I think, a good segue into the next question, which I have, Derek, is that many businesses claim that their customer service scores, their customer satisfaction scores, their CSAT are really good, and they're doing a great job, which obviously flies in the face a little bit of what we were talking about earlier. As an industry, do you think that we are measuring the right things when it comes to delivering to our customers? We'll start with you, Derek.
Yeah, it's interesting. We were chatting the other day as a precursor to this, and there's a quote. I thought it was from Einstein, but I've looked it up. It's apparently William Bruce Cameron. And there's a quote that says, not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. And I think it's really important. And I think the people in the industry that have been trying to do NPS and CSAT returns have tried to look for more specific ways of measuring the impact and tying the correlation between investments in procedures and technology and resources with the outcomes that are happening. And it is difficult, measuring trends for better, for worse is one thing. Are we going up? Are we going down? But trying to get for best in class or best appropriate and affordable with some of these experiences in service can be much more subjective and complicated. Now, I think there's a lot of data that's being integrated into systems now. So I think the granularity of the data is going to help, but it's still a bit of a black art. But it's very important that somehow they manage to tie the dots between the investments they make and the outcomes. And when they're looking to make procedural changes in investments, they have a clear view of what measurements can reliably tell them whether they've achieved what they wanted to.
No, it's interesting. What do you think, Katie?
Yeah, again, I totally agree. I think, measurements are fickle, right? We can only do what we can do, and we make our best efforts to try and implement the correct measurements, so the things that are actually measuring experience. But I had a recent customer service disaster with a bank, 2 hours, 4 different people, one complaint started by them, not me, because it was the only way to get to a resolution. And at the end of that, I haven't received any kind of request for feedback. And boy, oh boy, I would give them some feedback.
You want to give some feedback?
Yeah, for sure. But they're going to have an insight gap there. There's no feedback that they've requested. And I think that's also another part of it. It's not only is feedback in its traditional sense quite fickle, it's also typically transactional, and we don't look at feedback from the entire journey. And of course, customers don't look at the experience in a transactional way. I still have the impact of that experience, which will continue into the next time I ever speak to them. So we're too insular in the way that we look at that feedback. And of course, with the growing use of technology and increased use of conversational analytics, we can get so much more feedback without actually having to ask for it. But I think despite that being such a common technology, really, very few companies utilize it to its absolute maximum.
I think that's one of the key things there that you just said, is about utilizing the data. Contact centers are extremely data rich, aren't they? We measure every last thing within the operation, and it's what you do with it and what actually the conclusions you draw from that information that actually matter. And I think also it feels like there's been a shift since the pandemic, where we've moved much more to thinking about where we do measure that there's a lot more customer experience information being measured, as opposed to you used to walk in on the morning after the day before, and someone will say, well, did we hit service level? And if you hadn't hit service level, you had to have your excuse absolutely ready. And I used to always say, why is that the first thing we ask? Did we answer our 80% of calls in 20 seconds? No one ever asked until you got to the MBR at the end of the month. How did we do as far as our customers concerned? I've always been fascinated by that. Obviously, Trevor, very data rich in the CCAS environment. Do you think that the outputs from platforms such as your own are being utilized to the best outcomes for customers?
I think I would come back to what Katie and Derek were saying, is that the technology can answer all the questions, but we basically, from a base layer, we need to be in a position where an organization says, my success or greatness equals the following: brilliant customer service, fans that are really raving about your organization. Many customers will never contact most of their client organizations that they're contracted with, and they have different expectations as to what's going to happen when they do. I think what we're saying is that, correctly mined, there's no more innocence. This is the really big change that's occurring now with auto QM, with quality monitoring, and indeed with auto CSAT. So if I go back to sort of days when I would been sitting on the phone taking a customer support or a customer services call, and you maybe take 1,000 calls plus in a month, lots of interactions with customers. Most of us turn up at work to do the best job that we can. And one of the really brilliant things about some of the tools that now exist, if they're deployed correctly, is it also gives me, the agent who's the ambassador, engaging with the customer, a whole bunch of evidence-based protection that says, I've handled 1,000 interactions, all of them are captured and quality monitored, and actually 990 of them have been fabulous. Eventually, I will encounter people who will have had a bad day, had a complaint, a broken process, whatever. So there's a win in it for me as an agent, as well as insights in it from a customer perspective. And I think that ability from a data-rich perspective, not just to take data, but to take insight and actions and best practice, so that in a year, the contact center that you start with on the 1st of January 26 shouldn't be the same contact center you have on the 31st of December 26, because if you're correctly mining the data and the insights and the changes, those iterative changes that you will have could be significant in terms of your delivery. So there's no more innocence. The data is there and the data is accessible now.
It's interesting, isn't it? One of the things which I was having a discussion with someone about recently was and I think your point is excellent about the fact that that gives that protection to the agents, the fact that every call is monitored. That actually allows you to celebrate the great stuff, and actually, rather than saying you failed in 3% of your calls, you've actually done a great job in 97% of them. Is a great story, and I think that stops the sort of continuous and perpetual beating up of the agent and looking to find ways to beat up your agent. But one of the things that I was discussing with someone was the fact that every call is monitored and listened to was there was a fear that it was driving they described it as helpfulness out of the agent, because sometimes you do have to go off piste, you've got to go off script to actually deliver difficult and we're pushing the more complex inquiries into the agent space. Does anyone have any thoughts on that? And again, that's, for me, it feels very much like it's how you use. Again, it's back to how you use that data. But the fact that we are now monitoring everything and actually probably increase the overall assessment of agents from where it was before, how it's affecting agent behaviour.
I think I've seen a few companies where they are now trying to take the information and provide better coaching and training. And I think as we see more and more simple transactions being moved away from the queues, then the agent communities, the service advisors have got the opportunity to develop their skills, something which we'll talk about later, but also they can actually provide better quality feedback. And I'm seeing evidence that there are sectors that are really trying to enhance customer experience with the deliberate outcome of improving satisfaction scores. So I think using that data, and as you say, continuous improvement is the way to do it. But obviously the industries are very different demographics, different process flows, different types of transactions. It's very, very granular. But I think the intent is there. And as we've said a number of times now on this particular webinar, the technology isn't necessarily the issue. It's available. It's making up your mind where you're going to get your best bang for your buck and executing on it, measuring it and being iterative. And if you're going to fail quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I think the contact center customer experience landscape has changed remarkably since the pandemic and since we've got hybrid working, etc. But one of the things that happened very quickly after when the pandemic hit was the ability that businesses had to deliver things like answering the phone quickly and being able to deliver certain aspects of customer service changed. And when the pandemic ended, we still hear calls, don't we? We still phone contact centers and people say, we're still really busy. It's going to take longer than usual to answer your call. And I thought, did you know that message is still on in your IVR? Do you think, but this is more from a consumer's perspective, do you think that consumers now, because they've got perhaps used to that change in the way that they're being dealt with, because someone just mentioned earlier about how, I think it was you, Katie, how you feel about the business, how you treat it, and you're scarred from that for a period of time afterwards. But do you think consumers still care about the service that they receive, or are they just looking now for a purely transactional outcome to their inquiry? And how do you think that fits across the different demographics? Do you think that's skewed much more touch the older generation who want that care and the arm around them versus the youngsters who just want to get in, get out, get the job done? Should we start with you,
I
Katie?
imagine, yeah, thank you. I imagine that probably a lot of people would answer that they don't care about the service necessarily until they need the service. So much to Trevor's point, you might be a customer of an organization and actually never really need to interact with them. But the moment you do care about that service. The moment you need something, the moment you need to pick up a phone, find an email, you do care about the service. And I think that there is so much opportunity with the use of growing technology to create exceptional service. But I think the one thing that is going to be the biggest challenge is with any interaction, no matter be it digital, in person, virtual, you need to have three factors. You need to have the three S's, I call it. You need to have success, satisfaction, sentiment. Success, you get what you set out for, whatever that is, get some information, pay a bill. You need to have satisfaction, i.e., that it's on a channel of your choice, it's easy, convenient, available at the time you need it. And the last one, sentiment. There needs to be something that captures your emotion as a customer, some even mildest form of sentiment engendered, because that is what is going to make you remember the experience, make you have a positive perception of the experience, make you loyal to the company. And those three S's, I think, can be achieved in digital interactions with the use of AI. But that sentiment piece is still that big conversation, isn't it? Can we achieve sentiment in the world of AI? But go back to the original question. Yeah, I think people might say they don't care, but they ultimately do when they need it.
I think also a lot of businesses are forgetting the fact that they are your customer and they've called you for a reason, right? Nobody's calling a contact center to have a chat or just sort of, I've just, thank you very much, Amazon, just to let you know you've delivered my package on time as I expected. So I just wanted to say thank you. Something has
Oh,
gone wrong. And I think that businesses forget that actually there's a context to why that call happened in the first place. And then they've got to deal with it. And I think very much I find this, for example, in restaurants. All restaurants can make a mistake in the food that they deliver. But it's how they deal with it that actually matters. And I think that transposes into the contact center and customer service space.
yeah.
What do you think, Trevor?
Yeah, I think our expectations grow and grow. But we come back to the sort of first point is for all contact centers, private sector, public sector, commercial, any group now, queues are now a choice. The one thing that AI and chatbot delivery, for example, has brought to organizations is that service point that you made, which is, did we answer all our calls yesterday? All organizations now have the capability of being able to say, if you want to interact with us 24/7, you can do, and you can start to get answers. Whereas the perception historically is, whether it's phoning a large government department or a large financial services organization, is I am in a queue and I am waiting, getting stressed to get hold of a human. So queues are now a choice. They're not gone yet, but they are a choice within there. I think on the sentiment component, looking after your staff becomes really, really important. Finding that mechanism of catching them doing things right, because if you do that, you're going to have a much better human interaction with that brand, that organization. So automate where you can, but humans where you should or where you must is a mantra that organizations, in my view, should take on board in essence in there. So, and if you do that from a sentiment point of view, you are then looking after people at those key touch points. There was a report out recently from major organizations dealing with bereavement. It's a tough topic for many big, large organizations. At any given time, you've got a core group of vulnerable customers trying to contact an organization who really need human support in that point. And again, this is where smart journeys and smart automation can mean you free up people who can apply sentiment and actually interact with that organization correctly in there. So I think technology helps, but the journeys and walking through those journeys have to be done correctly. If the ladder's up against the wrong wall, it doesn't make a difference how good the ladder is. So that's that would be my view on it.
I love the expression catching them doing things right. That I'm gonna keep that in my little bank. Yeah. Sorry, Derek.
I think we've covered everything. What's interesting is we kind of consistently said, if you're thinking about the original question around service and transactional outcomes, I think they are intertwined. And the answer depends on the industry, the interaction type. We've talked about the demographic of the customer, but also the urgency and associated risk around the dialogue would change people's perception as to whether they want a transaction or whether they want a service. But the reason why I say they're intertwined is, of course, you can have poor service, and that can negatively impact transactional success. Even if the transaction itself is efficient, and it did what it did, if the process has gone wrong, or if you don't have that sentiment and empathy, that doesn't work. But also, if you can get high quality customer service outcomes, then that can lead to better transactional delivery as well and foster loyalty, repeat business. So I don't think it's a one size fits all. I think it depends on the type of interaction, the industry, the dialogue, the demograph, but they're both important. And I think getting that blend right and affordable, because you could spend a fortune trying to get this perfect, that's what we need to focus on as an industry.
I think the interesting thing that's been mentioned a few times is the customer journey piece and actually getting that right. A lot of businesses talk about, because we predominantly get into the sort of voice conversation, but there's multiple channels that businesses will offer their customers, and they'll say we're giving customers choice. That's what customers demand. They demand choice. But the reality of that, I think, is that, are we really? Because in the true giving customers choice, they should be able to service their inquiry through whatever channel they choose. But very often you kind of almost be certain that the voice channel can do everything. Yet if I go down automated web chat, for example, AI chatbot, then where's the limitations? And I think part of that is getting your customer into the right channel for their inquiry, and also how they want to be serviced as quickly as possible.
Yeah. I once worked with a housing association who had implemented WhatsApp as their channel of choice. It was initially a cost-saving measure, and to the point about understanding what your customers want, it was an age demographic who did not use WhatsApp, so it completely had to be ripped up and started again. It was just choice in anything but choice.
Very true. So the next question is, I think Trevor's going to enjoy this one. And AI is marching at pace into our industry. Everyone is, I think, there's a lot of people operating with the FOMO hat on. We must have some AI in our contact center, otherwise we're behind the curve. But how do you think this technology is going to impact the customers in the next year? But I think more interestingly, where are we going to be in the next 5 years?
Yeah, I come back to the more human thing. If you think about every contact center we've ever been in or worked in, public sector, private sector, whatever, there's always that we could do with some more heads, some more resources, some more agents. There's never enough hours in the day. That phrase keeps coming up. So suddenly, if you're able to hire some digital colleagues and bring that resource alongside and use it correctly, that can massively change. I think in the immediate term, within the next 6 months, I would expect pretty much everybody on this call who isn't already using AI to assist with transcription and meeting capture and all that to be moved into that, and that to be seen as the norm. I would also expect that the big win that AI brings into quality management and compliance management, suddenly that will become, because that the holy grail in essence is to be able to capture and understand all of my interactions and make sure that we're, as an organization, doing things right and enhancing service. And you can't do that by just throwing more bodies at it. So I think that will basically become real, but it needs to be bite-sized. And one of the bits of advice or guidance that I've seen, and I only say it from seeing organizations where it's maybe run from IT, is appoint somebody or a group of people to manage that AI piece with a mandate from the business, not necessarily IT people, not technology. At that front end, there's a huge amount of knowledge in customer experience, marketing. We're all customers. And going back to your previous question about our expectations from organizations, is we have the same expectation now when we phone the school, the bank, the holiday company. When we book a taxi from a local taxi company, we have maybe Uber or Lyft or Free Now or whatever in our heads, thinking this technology is possible. So from my point of view, in the short term, that movement to assisting the agent, so we've got transcription, so the agent can focus on the customer, will become prevalent. The agents will become super agents and more empowered. We need to use the technology alongside them to look after those agents, deal with agent wellness, because you mentioned, Chris, that we're taking away some of the easy stuff and giving the customer the agents the more complex things to deal with. I think when we roll forward, as much as we can see, and Cisco basically take about 1,000 of their big global customers every year and poll around this particular space. And actually there was a blip between last year and this year where organizations thought they were more ready than they were this year. And I think it's because there's a ton of choice in there. But when I look out the horizon 2 to 3 years out, in as much as I can basically see that smart organizations will be able to do more with the smart humans and actually get and allow us to do more than we currently do. Not necessarily the same things, but they'll be able to do more smart things. That's my view as to where we will be. There'll be no more queues, there'll be no more innocence, there'll be no more I didn't know that's what the customers were asking. So it's then down to what the organizations do with that incredible gold that they're being handed.
Sounds beautiful. What do you think, Derek? What looking into your crystal ball?
Enough said. No, very good summary. What's interesting is in the last kind of year and a half, regardless of which technology vendor you've been aligned to, I think we're seeing really good use cases in the public domain where these technologies have done what they said on the tin. The ideas have become tested, proven, run at scale, and they are making a difference. And I think, a couple of years ago, it might have been some more niche players, or maybe one of the vendors would have reduced an auto summarization package 3 months before the others. But most of the stuff that we're thinking around about, the analytics predictive that we talked about, omni-channel, sentiment we've spoken about a lot, and feedback, automating routine tasks, all of these things are viable and there's evidence. And there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to transform customer contact centers today and do more of that. And I don't think it's a switch and replace unless you really have got some technology challenges that you haven't addressed yet. I think it's more about, as we said right at the start, find your biggest opportunities and challenges. Don't necessarily try and crack the biggest nut if it's too difficult to crack, but pick your fights and keep moving forwards. And I think the technology is there, and we've seen very good examples of how that's been deployed and how people have benefited from it.
Excellent. Katie, where are we
Yeah,
going to be in 5 years?
well, I do not have a crystal ball, and I can't possibly answer that question if I'm quite honest. I mean, what I do think is that in a year's time, we're probably going to be on similar calls to this, having very similar conversations. I honestly don't think a lot is going to change in a year. If you look back at the technology that's been around for the last few years and all of this, bustling new talk of AI, actually we're still utilizing very similar technology, better, perhaps enhanced, but the most common AI use in contact centers is still what we've been using for a little while, just better. But to kind of Derek's point, shifting the question slightly, what I have seen recently is organizations standing on big public stages talking very candidly about the waste of money and time and resource that they've put into failed proof of concepts around the implementation of new tools, and the lack of trust that their relationships with the vendors at the time have created, because it has just been about, oh, this is new, this is tantalizing, you should do this. So I think one of the biggest changes is that actually vendors are going to be much more strategic and supportive in a bespoke way to the company that they're working with. And going back to the point we had right at the beginning, rather than just chucking technology in for the sake of chucking technology in, really understanding organization wants, needs, customer wants, needs, and making sure that the implementation is strategic and appropriate.
Yeah, and I think also one of the things I would like to see improve within the space is when people do implement the technology stacks, that they utilize it better. We see quite low utilization. People are buying the dream and they're buying these platforms, but then what they actually get out of it is not as high. We're seeing sort of 10, 15, 20% at best utilization of CCaaS. And I think, from a value for money perspective, I think we should be pushing that as a concept. I want to move on to the final question, just to allow us some time for Q&A at the end. I also want to give us enough time to just cover this because it's a slightly different track. And I'm going to expand the question slightly from the notes that you guys saw, because the question is, do you think that the customer service industry is doing enough to support vulnerable customers? But just given one of the comments we mentioned, agents, do you think we do enough to support vulnerable customers? But also there'll be vulnerability. I think 33% of the UK population has got some kind of disability or vulnerability. So they will then be in our cohorts of contact center agents. So to expand the question, do we support our vulnerable customers enough? But actually, are we using the technologies and are we supporting our agents who may have vulnerabilities well enough? Should we start with you, Katie?
Yeah, I suppose I can give you a very quick and succinct answer on what I think there. Generally speaking, I don't think we support our customers enough, never mind our vulnerable customers. So I think the answer is no. I think problems come to the forefront as and when they occur, and then there seems to be this, the jump reactive nature to it. So no. And when we say vulnerability is absolutely massive, right? In who we can bucket into that title. I used to work in financial services, particularly working with people in debt, and they are absolutely vulnerable. They're financially vulnerable, never mind the whole horde of other vulnerabilities that come with that. So no, I don't think we recognize it enough, and I don't think we are utilizing technology or our people to support vulnerable customers or employees.
Trevor, do you think that, given what Katie said, that is the technology, particularly the AI piece, mature enough to be delivering to vulnerable people?
Yes, to a degree on both levels, both the agents and indeed on the customer side. The answer to the question is, are we doing enough? No. Could we be doing more? Absolutely, every day. And all of us can be vulnerable customers, and all of us have possibly been vulnerable customers. We've had something, we've had a robbery, we've had a break-in, we've had interactions, we've had, something going wrong from a financial services, all of those things. So the vulnerable aren't some, dare I say, group that sort of is static that we can tick a box and map into a platform. But legislation we're seeing with Consumer Duty Act, I also look after Ireland's equivalent legislation that exists over there. It's trying to make organizations legislatively look after these people. But one of the things that we see within the agent community, the contact center agent community as well is, and hybrid working was referenced, is agents also can be dealing at the front end with tough customer interactions. And again, that group of people can also become vulnerable and need to be looked after. If I walk into a floor of a conventional contact center and I'm having a bad day, presumably my team leader or otherwise can see that and can go, Trevor, take a minute, take a break. So the technology allows us now, the smart use of that technology should also pick up on that positively and give me a chance to be looked after. So we need to do more. The technology does allow us to do more, but only if those journeys are correctly dealt with and handled. And we've seen mis-selling challenges across different sectors in financial services. We've seen pressure in the health service and the rest of it too. So the issue of not dealing with that customer, that vulnerability, is really expensive when it goes wrong. So organizations need to do more, and it's not just being altruistic in there, I would say.
Eric, what do you think?
So it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think if we were doing enough to support vulnerable customers, every single journey we went on would be fantastic and fabulous from every perspective. And clearly, it's going to take a long time to happen. Doesn't mean to say that we can't make a difference and we can't help with processes and consulting in technology to help aspects like accessibility, tailoring assistance, providing empathy whilst we're doing those transactions and those customer service inquiries. There's a lot of work being done around training staff and trying to help staff be more empathetic and give them the right information in contact, which will make them better dialogues. We've seen a huge amount of the accessibility around communications. You know, we've got a lot of stuff with Braille now and speech response and all these sorts of things. And then as we get more data and as we get more integrated systems, being able to personalize support is being implemented and exploited across all the industries, and that will actually help vulnerable customers be identified and get a different service. And then policies. There are companies now that are thinking about, when we identify a vulnerable person, how do we change it? It's not the standard SLA. It's not the standard go and wait in a queue. Are you going to deal with them differently? And some of that might need different policies, different measurement systems, different reward systems to allow those processes to happen. So I think the pieces of the puzzle are there, and I think there's a lot of organizations are trying to do better, but it is complex, and we won't get to the end of it because there'll always be too much to do. But I think we've got a lot of experience in the industry and technology that can help us move in the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
It is a very interesting one, and I think there's a quite a range, isn't there, of how people think about these things. From having, I'm doing the right thing because I've written a policy or I've written a document that says we've thought about this, but actually implementing it across a 1,000-seat call center, for example, they're not very good at that, you know. And actually, when people get to actually having to deal with someone who is vulnerable, they could flounder. I think the point you made as well about the fact that you can push people into vulnerability because we're pushing the difficult customers into the agent space. And particularly, you mentioned bereavement. There was a contact center I was talking to recently who they get a higher proportion, they believe, of people who are talking about bereavement or serious illness. And the effect it was having on their agents was absolutely monumental.
Yeah. I was going to give an example around the bereavement scenario because I phoned a pension provider and I was given a chatbot, and none of the chatbot standard processes was death or bereavement. And I typed in bereavement, nothing happened. Typed in death, nothing happened. Typed in talk to an agent, nothing happened. And eventually I had to find a number and phone a number and eventually got through. When I did the same with Lloyds Bank, on the speech recognition, I said the word death or bereavement, and within 3 rings, I got through to a specialist team.
Brilliant.
Totally different experience. So it can be done. The question is who's joining the dots and who's got the priorities and who's going to provide those services.
Oh,
Chris, I
you're on
think
mute.
we've lost you on audio. We can see your lips moving, but there's no noise.
Am
You've
I back?
muted yourself.
Oh,
There you go.
I think someone muted me. give Derek a chance to talk. No, I think it's really interesting, and I think the whole piece around vulnerability and in the customer experience is probably a webinar on its own, and I think probably that's one of the ones we're going to do. I think we've probably reached the end of our discussion. I think Chantal is going to jump back in and open the floor up to our audience if they've got any questions for you. Just while Chantal's
Absolutely.
coming back in, I just wanted to put a little advert, Chantal, if I can, about our benchmarking that we did. That's now going to be available for people to request. That's where we've gone to quite a sizable number of contact centres within the UK, and we asked them. We did it's basically the survey of UK contact centres, how things are doing, comparing and contrasting, and there'll be a space on the UKCCF website very shortly where you can request the download of that. It's a very interesting
That's
report, and
great.
I've seen it.
Looking
Chantal,
forward
over
to
to you.
that one. Yes, we've got lots of questions, so I'm going to jump straight in. Some of them are comments, so I'm just going to read them out. And then you guys can make comments in return. So Kirsty, thank you for your input. So Kirsty has commented, the customer journey should provide a complete 360-degree view, not just from a customer's perspective, but also from a business side. By integrating all systems into a single user interface, particularly at the contact center front end, we empower operations with the information and tools they need to deliver seamless, personalised service. So that was a comment from Kirsty. Any comments, panel?
Yep, totally agree. Whenever I'm working with companies and looking at customer journey mapping, always like to do what we call the front of stage and back of stage, because ultimately it is great to have that visibility of your customer journey. But if you've got your back end connected to it, then you know exactly what's influencing that customer journey and can manipulate and change as per required.
Yeah, I agree. I think the utopia is making sure that you've got access to everything you need to be able to manage that dialogue and transaction through its life. But the other trick that we're seeing is you can't overwhelm the users of the system, so they've got to get help getting the right bits of information out. But I think the type of technologies that we see can be used in the right way to provide a journey which has the right information at the right point in the journey in the discussion, but also has access to the detailed information to help that dialogue complete as efficiently as possible.
Fantastic. And on to our next comment. This is from Sophie. So hi, Sophie. So Sophie agrees with the panel's point about walking through the processes as a customer. And Sophie has said she refers to a recent challenge with a large retailer where she needed to navigate through an IVR to get to the kitchen department. She literally had to guess the selection as the initial greeting did not offer me an option for my query. When Sophie got through to the wrong agent, she was told that they are not allowed to transfer to kitchens. But if Sophie pressed option 1 and then 4 and then 6, that secret code would then get her through to the team. If one person from the company had walked this IVR themselves, they'd have adjusted it right away. So low tech resolution. Trevor, do you want to comment on that one?
Yeah, sort of Robbie Burns comes to mind. Oh, wad some power that gift to gie us to see ourselves as others see us. And effectively, in that situation there, walking through the whole journey from all of the different personas of a customer, location, device, time, etc., I think is absolutely crucial. And I think the one great thing that smartly deployed AI agents should allow us to do is to be able to speak naturally and say, put me through to the kitchens department without having to think that the organization may have called that homeware or something else, some other word that doesn't actually, that doesn't necessarily translate. And we all work in organizations where we have our own language, our own acronyms, our own stories, and then we translate those and think that the whole customer base also understands those. So that's a classic case where I think the technology will help us serve better, but we definitely have to be constantly doing our own journeys. Yeah.
And what's interesting, I bet the people in the kitchens department are congratulating themselves that they haven't got any customer service or post-sales inquiries. There's no queue, and they're the best department in the company because nobody can get through to them.
I think there's also a disconnect, isn't there, between what the C-suite and what the sort of senior leaders think happens in their business. Like you get the MD of a bank who needs a new credit card. He doesn't follow the process that we follow. He says to his PA, I need a credit card. He gets it within about 30 minutes because that's the way it works. And what a great service we provide.
Amazing, thank you. I'm going to ask another question from Sophie because I'd really like to hear the panel's thoughts on this as well. So Sophie would be interested in understanding how we're quantifying the ever-changing customer expectations. So we talk about this a lot, but what's the panel's opinion on those expectations and how they might have changed? Katie, do you want to take this one first?
Yeah, I think, Derek mentioned earlier the customer satisfaction index, and I think we have to look at broad ranging industry reports like that to get a wider view of customer expectations. But I think it's not unfair to say that with the constant spotlight on AI, that expectations aren't increasing because it's out there, it's in the public domain. People are seeing and using AI personally in their everyday lives, even in minimal ways. But that, again, like we were talking about, you don't look at things transactionally. That personal use, it translates into business, or one good experience translates into another experience, even if it's a completely different industry. So as customers, we just compare against things which are perhaps incomparable, but as such, our expectations change. And I think, we are expecting pace, we are expecting ease, we are expecting seamless, friction-free experiences. Are companies always meeting those? No, not right now.
Do you think that
Excellent.
the expectation also changes depending on the channel and where you end up? So, for example, when I phone up my mobile phone provider and I get through to one of their overseas contact centres, my expectation of what I'm going to get from that agent is very different to what I expect if I get through to their UK-based contact centre, just as an example.
Totally, and so much influences perception. I talked about the example of a bank interaction that I had earlier. I recently tried to interact with my broadband provider on a chat function, and it was the simple fail of saying an agent will be with you shortly, and 40 minutes later, an agent is still not with me, and I've had no indication of when shortly is going to be. And all of those interactions have actually created in myself a generally negative interaction on customer service. And it's not the next company's fault. It's just because all of the customer service interactions I've had recently just seem to have had really basic pain points in them. So our expectations are influenced so vastly by so much.
There are so many
I guess.
examples of bad experience, regardless of industry and demographic, but also
Mhm.
there are so many examples of fabulous experience. So
Mhm.
people expect, if your local council can use AI to help you report some bins and waste and rubbish that's in the wrong place without filling out a form for 30 minutes, take a video, send it in, and they say thank you. Why can't commercial companies that are trying to make money provide those services? So those little use cases and those examples of how systems and technology and process can be done are just pervasive across all different walks of life and all different scenarios. So the tolerance of the end users for companies that they presume are big and should care for not delivering some of that when it matters to them is getting shorter fuse all the time.
When we all know what great customer service actually feels like, where it feels personal, it's interacted, whether it's a good interaction with a restaurant or good interaction with a brand or a business that we deal with. So I think the our expectations of customer services are up here. Depending on the point we interact with an organization, is because maybe a process has failed or we're now in a position of need or vulnerability in there. And the technology definitely exists now. But I come back to my point of that 1% every day, because the data will be surfaced about what the call drivers are, the contact drivers are, and the ability for an organization for because some of the simpler stuff, some of the basic stuff disappears, to reskill people in the organization to become prompt engineers, basically people who can ask better questions and then solve those issues, means the problems you have in the 1st of January shouldn't in theory be the same problems you're having in the 1st of February and March if you can iterate those changes in there. But it's and if you don't and someone else does, then you can see your whole organization, your whole business can actually move, because we will move if to an organization that's easier to do business with.
But if you just pick up on a couple of things you said there and playing back into what Katie just said. So Katie just said that there was a everyone she's phoned recently has given her bad service. Everyone I've phoned recently has given me bad service, right? So it cannot be the case that people do not know that their service is not great, because your point is everybody knows what good customer service is. So are we designing mediocrity into the service that we're providing, or the industry, should we say? That's my challenge to all of this.
I think some of it can be organizations, and this isn't a new thing, it's happened a while ago. I'll give you an example in a minute, but I think organizations are deliberately reducing the responsiveness on certain channels that are old and expensive to try and force people to pay more attention to the new channels, to go digital, to take an SMS link, to go and download the app, to make sure that the chatbot doesn't already have a journey that will answer your question, and to try and encourage people to do that. Yes, you can say, by the way, it might be answered quicker if you take this new channel, but leaving them hanging on the line may just force people to get off their butts and do it. But for those people that can't or don't want to do it, or they know already that the conversation is a little bit clever and a little bit specialist, it's a little bit quirky, you're just going to have to sit on the phone, and it's really frustrating. And some of it just could be that they're struggling with their resource management because of hybrid working, and they haven't really got their ducks lined up as well as we'd hoped they had.
Amazing. I'm going to move on to the next question. It's more of a comment, actually. It's a comment from Martin. This is back to a bit earlier on in the session. So Martin says, loves the act of catching someone doing something right. So often about the wrong, but celebrating the difference people make is so important. Any views on that one, Chris?
I'd love the expression, and I think we should be taking a more positive spin on what we do. Let's stop looking for fault. Let's look for and celebrate the great things that happen in our industry.
Yeah, auto CSAT in our world that I've seen, it struck me immediately as I'm an agent and I can say to my boss, 900 of my 910 interactions have been pretty damn good. I'm proud of that. And if 10 interactions were less than good, let's focus on the 900 that are great, and suddenly you can dive deeper into it. Yeah, so I'm a big fan of that.
And I think flipping the tables traditionally as well, if somebody was working and they typically had lower than average handle times, but then one call ended up being 3 times as long as it should be, if you can prove that the outcome was excellent, you got 5 stars, and the person sent a gushing note back into the organization saying, I know it was tough, but thanks, that's worth its weight. But most people would focus on the fact that one of those calls was too long. And so I think the industry is changing, but there's still a lot of operational metrics that are ruling the roost. And I think when people can get the time and resource to try and do things better, I think celebrating success more and more, which we've always done in contact centers, but trying to do that specifically with very good experience and good service is going to be better than some of the hammer approach that we took in the past.
I think just Derek, just picking up on your point about length of calls, and from memory, hopefully my memory serves me right, I think it was Malcolm Gladwell, one of his books, he, looking at data points, identified that, for example, medical practitioners spending 7 to 8 minutes explaining, dare I say, a tough diagnosis or outcome to a customer, to a patient, versus a practitioner explaining the same outcome who's taking 14, 15 minutes. The malpractice suits being brought against organizations who are quickly trying to get it out the door, thinking it was just transactional information, where it was a very significant additional piece. So sometimes by automating the simple stuff and freeing us up to be more human, the fact that my notes get taken on the call, the fact that the summary is done, means I can actually spend time interacting and really getting to the bottom of the reason why it's there. So I think sometimes I think that's where I lead back into correctly deployed. It can make us more human, but we have to just allow humans to do the good stuff that humans are good at.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Amazing panel. Well, I'm good that we do have lots more questions. We can continue this conversation on LinkedIn. I'll post the questions and tag the panelists on LinkedIn, and we can continue that conversation there. So it just leaves for me to say thank you so much to everybody for attending the live session today. A very special thank you to Chris, to Trevor, to Katie, and for Derek for leading such an amazing panel today. I really have enjoyed it, and I hope you have too. As I said at the beginning, this session has been recorded, and you will receive a follow-up email with the recording in, and there'll be contact details in there as well if you do have any further questions for any of the panel. As Chris mentioned, we've got the UKCCF benchmarking report launching very, very soon, so please watch your inboxes for your invite to download that. And for any information on future UKCCF events, please visit our website, which is uk-ccf.co.uk/events. And also the closing date for our nominations for our awards is fast approaching. So we'd love to get you involved in that as well. So thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon and goodbye. Thank you very much, panel.
Thank
Thanks all.
you.
Thank you.
Yeah, very much.